All right, everybody. Welcome to another Developer Live cast here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. We got a great one for you tonight. We're going to be discussing what it means to work on your first game and some of the challenges and tribulations that can pop up. And joining me is designer from Mountaintop Games, who is currently working on their first game that will be a tabletop Kickstarter game going up March 15th. If things go accordingly, you should be seeing this recorded either right at the start or a little short thereafter of the campaign. So please welcome to the podcast from Mountaintop Games, Matt.
Hi, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
I am doing great. How are you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing very well.
All right, it's great to have you on, and thank you for getting in touch with me on Twitter.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so we got certainly a lot to discuss tonight. So to begin with, could you talk a little bit about what your background is and what is Mountaintop Games?
Sure. Let's see. I started playing hobby board games maybe a few years back. I've always played the classics like Monopoly and Risk, being a young guy. But some friends of mine, when I moved back to the Madison, Wisconsin area, really got me into hobby board games and some of the cooler, heavier games that are out there, and fell in love with it and decided, why not try my hand at it myself. So I kind of worked on designing games maybe starting a year and a half back, and really enjoyed it, and figured, seeing all the growth and the explosion of Kickstarter out there, it really became sort of this bucket list concept to me. Like, wow, I want to design something on my own. I want to be able to self-publish something and just get it out into the world. So I started Mountaintop Games. It's a one-man LLC right now, but hopefully that can be the channel that I bring a game out into the market.
Awesome. And as you said, this was kind of like your dream idea to make your tabletop game. I guess from the get-go, did you have any idea of wanting to make like a digital game, or do you want to focus primarily on tabletops?
Yeah, I always enjoyed both. Of many types of games, I guess, both digital games, mostly on the computer, a little bit on console, and also tabletop more recently. I don't have the best programming skills. I did HTML and Java back in high school, but that's about the extent of my knowledge there. So I don't think anything digital was really felt quite within the realm of my capability. But tabletop, it's just a pen and a paper.
Yeah.
Eventually print it out on cardboard and you can have a game. So that's really, I felt, especially with Kickstarter, was the easiest path for me to get out there.
Oh yeah, and as you said, when it comes to tabletop design, it's a lot easier to quantify or put in front of someone compared to a digital game where a lot of that is obviously abstracted. And of course, it's also a lot easier to play test that game. Do you know the game designer, or have you heard of him, John Brieger, by any chance?
I do. I actually had the chance to meet him in person recently at one of the Protospiel events here in Madison, where a bunch of tabletop game designers get together and play test each other's games and be able to provide some feedback on the designs. So yeah, I found him on Twitter, and he's got a ton of good advice out there, and it was cool to finally meet him in person.
Yeah, we've spoken several times on previous podcasts, and we've discussed about a lot of the importance of playtesting, and whether it's from a digital or tabletop experience. And he's definitely a very informative guy when it comes to that topic.
For sure. Yeah, he's a wealth of knowledge, and I love seeing his kind of daily or periodic tweets about playtesting, and I try to follow him as closely as I can because it's a lot of good stuff.
Now, with your first game, I guess another question I want to ask you about, Matt, with the idea of going to Kickstarter, we'll be talking more in depth about it and kind of what you've worked on later on the cast. But when you originally started to get serious about your tabletop game, which, in case we haven't mentioned yet, it's called The Primary, did you have the original plan to go to Kickstarter, or did that come up during development?
I think it was always in my mind, and kind of from the very beginning of the design, I figured if I want to put it out there, I want to do it myself. Whether that's the smartest idea or not, I'm not sure. I think part of that came from the challenge that it is a political election themed game, and I know that can be somewhat contentious and maybe a love hate topic or a love hate theme. And I don't know how well some of the more entrenched publishers would receive that, or how much of an appetite they would have for that type of game. Um, so I figured, doing it myself, I can make sure it at least has a chance.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's always very tricky when it comes to political games. We just did a podcast with oh goodness, he's gonna be angry at me now. I forgot his name. Here it is, Luke Hughes, who's currently
Okay.
working on the game Burden of Command, which is a tactical strategy game dealing with the psychological impact of war, especially with
Hmm.
World War II veterans and stuff like that.
Oh,
And it can be very tricky when you're trying to navigate, anything that's either considered realistic or quote unquote political, especially
for
in today's
sure.
market.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the approach that I took with the primary, politics can be a very highly debated subject, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So the path I tried to take was to stay fairly neutral. There's no political party represented in the game that comes from real life. There's actually no political parties at all that are really called out. So there's no Democrats, there's no Republicans, there's no Green Party. The premise of the primary is actually that it's a primary election and you're all within the same party. So there's no partisan debates, there's no negotiation. It's not about actual real life topics or anything that could be really contentious.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess before we start talking a little bit more about the design of the primary in more, I guess more specifically, I guess here's my one, I guess, quote unquote, softball question for you. I always like to ask developers this, but besides, of course, obviously the tabletop genre, what video game genres do you typically like to play? Like, what do you normally play in when you're trying to relax or when you're not thinking about your own game?
Sure, sure. So I've always been an RPG fan, since a little kid. I used to play WoW. Growing up, I found less and less time to really immerse myself in those types of games. Today, when I play something digital, it's most likely on my phone. I like to stick to the tabletop genre, so it's usually a digital representation of, a tabletop game. Um, One of my favorites is Star Realms, for example. It's a quick, couple minute game. I can get one in, a nice little break, and then get back to work or get back to something that I'm trying to be a little bit more productive with.
Mm-hmm. All right. So with that, let's talk a little bit more about the primary, and then we'll discuss what you've done with the Kickstarter. And then for those of you watching, our final topic will be more or less kind of again like how you found being a first-time game designer. So
Sure.
you already talked a little bit about the high-level concept of what the primary is, that we're basically playing within the same political party. So
Right.
I guess my first question then is, what is like the general play of the primary? Like, what are you going to be doing in the game?
Sure. So the core of the game is focused around a few different mechanics that are probably familiar to tabletop game designers, but you have a hand of 14 different action cards, of which there's only 7 different types of cards. So there's numerous cards that you have a couple different repeats within your hand. So you use these cards to travel around the country, to gain influence, to kind of deploy your influence or remove somebody else's influence from the map. And the way that you do this is you take, of your hand of cards, you'll place 4 of them face down in the order that you want them executed. So you're kind of planning ahead, you're thinking about what your opponents are going to do, and you plan out your strategy for that round. So you have 4 cards face down, everyone else has 4 cards face down that they choose simultaneously. And then starting with the first player, you'll reveal your first card, execute that action, whether it's moving or gaining influence or holding a rally and placing influence where your candidate is. And then the second player will reveal their first card and execute it. Third player will reveal their card and execute it. And you can kind of go around until everyone has executed all 4 of their cards. So there's a little bit of flexibility there where I had this plan going into the round, but things changed. Maybe somebody else had the same idea I did, and I kind of want to bail and jump to a different region of the country and work over there.
Okay. Can cards like counter other cards?
So there's no direct like a negate or a veto. There's no way that you can immediately stop somebody else's action. If I choose to play a positive add card, I'll take one of my influence cubes and I can put it anywhere on the map. Doesn't matter where I am. If I do that with my first card, the next player could potentially play a negative add card, and that can remove any one cube from the map, no matter where it is. So in that sense, he could kind of counteract what I just did, but there's nothing directly that will cancel my action.
Okay. Now, in terms of, I guess, the number of cards, like, how many cards are you planning on shipping with the primary? Like, I guess a total in terms of, like, the actions that you came up with.
Okay, so for the action cards specifically, there's 7 different types.
Okay.
So I can go and explain a little bit more. Let's see. There's a bus card. So the map is split into regions, and the votes occur in this primary election by regions, not by states. So the bus card allows you to move from your current region, wherever your pawn is located, to an adjacent region, and that doesn't cost you anything. You have a plain card that allows you to move anywhere on the map, but that one forces you to pay 1 influence, and that goes back to your bank, which you must later earn again to spend with other cards. So those 2 cards are the ways that you can travel around the map. You have both a positive and a negative add, which I just mentioned. They allow you to add influence or remove influence anywhere on the map. You have a rally card, which allows you to add 2 influence cubes to the map, but they must go in the region where you are located. There's 2 more left. There's a fundraiser card, and that's the way that you gain these influence cubes to then spend. So a fundraiser card is simply gain 1 cube from your bank and add it to your hand. And then the final card is a little bit trickier. It's for the super pack. So like I mentioned earlier, every player for 1 round will play 4 cards and commit them face down. So of those 4 cards, whoever plays the most of these super pack cards will gain 4 cubes from their bank to their hand. So if I'm really lucky, I could play one of these super pack cards and nobody else plays any, and I get a great deal. I get 4 cubes for 1 card. But if I'm really unlucky, I could go all in. I really want the super pack this round, and I play all 4 of my cards as super pack. But somebody else had the same idea. So anytime there's a tie, all the tied players only get 2 influence cubes. So there's kind of a little push-pull there, a little bit of a mind game going on. Hey, I'm low on cubes, they're low on cubes. What do I think they're going to do this round? Are they going to, kind of play it conservative and just go for the fundraiser? Or who's going to be risky and try and win the super pack?
Okay. And now, in order to win the game, is it just get as many influence cubes on the map as possible?
So the way that works, the game is played over 11 rounds, and you have small tokens with the numbers 1 to 11 printed on them. Sometimes one of the numbers from 1 to 11 will have multiple tokens. So you use these tokens, you kind of randomly distribute them across the board, 1 per region. So the number that ends up on the region is it shows during which round that votes. And every region has a certain number of delegates at stake, depending on how large the region is, what their population is. It's actually based on, I think, the 2016 Republican delegate count. We had to kind of round down and make it a little bit easier for the math. So you're moving around the country, and when it comes time that, let's say, the region of like the California region, kind of that West Coast region, it's time for them to vote at the end of, let's say, round 2. They have a bunch of delegates at stake. California is a huge state. If I have the most influence in that region once it's voting, I win those delegates, and you kind of track it along this perimeter of the board with a score track. And then once it's voted, it doesn't matter anymore. You don't have to think about that region anymore. You wipe the cubes off and you flip over the little token to show that it voted, and the map shrinks a little bit. And then you kind of have to plan, okay, what regions are worth the most delegates, which in the end will get you the victory, but which ones are voting soonest, and how do I prioritize between those two components?
Mm-hmm. Does the time for each area vote, is that fixed for each game you play, or is that change or is random?
No. So the way that I have recommended is for your first game, there's actually an area where you set aside a few tokens where no votes will happen, just to kind of give you a break and collect your thoughts and plan your strategy for the rest of the game. So there's a recommended setup where you use the rounds 1, 5, and 9 just to have a sort of a bye week or a little off period where you don't have to vote. And then the rest of the tokens you randomize and you just kind of scatter them out there randomly. That's sort of the recommendation for your first game, just to help speed up the process. But once you get a feel for the game and you understand how it works, you might want to create a different scenario that you find more interesting. You could randomize the 3 tokens that don't have a vote. So maybe you want votes to happen in the first 3 rounds, but you don't want votes to happen in the middle, like 5, 6, 7. Just trying to help add to the replayability and let people be a little bit more creative with their game setup.
All right. And for people watching this live or recorded right now, I'm just looking at the information you have on Twitter. So the game's going to be set up for 3 to 5 players at a time, and you're looking at an average play length of 45 minutes. Is that correct?
Actually, there's a solo mode that I'm working on. So the intent is to have it from 1 to 5 players, okay, and about 45 minutes. When you average across the player counts, it tends to be, when I play, 10 to 15 minutes per player. Solo is an exception, maybe like 20 minutes for a solo.
All right. Now, I guess another question for you, Matt. How long, I guess, have you been working on the primary for?
Yeah. I think it's been just over a year now. I think we started President's Day of last year. So not too long in the scheme of some people out there, but long enough where it feels like it's been a very long time.
Yeah, I think I've heard that from a lot of developers as well. Now, in terms of the gameplay, I think this will this will also kind of infer when we talk later on about being a first-time developer. But as you develop the primary, did the game design change at all dramatically from when you started to where it's at now?
I think it was a very interesting case where the story's kind of funny, I guess. So a roommate and I kind of started this game design very late at night about a year ago. So we just had kind of talked about it, like, wow, the primary election would be a really cool topic or theme or idea for a board game. Got crazy excited. We were working through all these ideas. Then I kind of ran out of steam and went to bed, and woke up in the morning, and he had added a little bit to it. I think he had kind of refined the idea of the action programming with the 4 cards, and we had kind of laid out the map the previous night. But actually, like, the core gameplay, the core idea of the game hasn't changed a ton from that original state to now. I think along the way it's changed a lot, but it's kind of refined its way back to where it is, which isn't terribly or radically different than what it started at. A lot of things have been added, like the news cards or the candidate cards and other things that we can get into, but I think the core experience or the core gameplay was actually kind of there from the beginning, which I think was maybe just a stroke of luck.
Yeah, and can always be tricky when designing games like this, especially once you start putting in front of people to see what they think about it. Have you done any playtesting on your end, Matt, with the primary?
Yeah, we've done quite a bit of playtesting. I have a spreadsheet somewhere. I think it's over 100 playtests. mostly, when I've been present, some that's been remote, some that I've tried to do through third-party development. There's a lot of proto-spiels in the area around Madison. There's some in Chicago, Madison, Milwaukee. There's a great game design community in Madison. There's a lot of people who've designed and published their own games here, so it's a great support system. And there's definitely been a lot of play testing, and I think throughout the course of the design process, I've kind of learned how to do it better for sure. I think at times I was playing the game more than play testing.
Mm-hmm. And it can always be very tricky, especially as a first-time developer, when you put your game in, somebody else's hands, and you're kind of left there thinking, what do they think about my game? Do they like it? Do they not?
Yeah. It's pretty common advice that you'll receive that, you don't want to get too attached to it or attach your self value to the game or your self-worth.
Oh, yes.
And it's just an opinion. Not everybody's gonna love your game, but I think sometimes it's easier said than done.
Oh, that is certainly for sure, and that's not just with tabletop games. We have certainly seen this on the digital side as well.
For sure.
A question from chat. Oscar and I were apparently on the same wavelength about asking about playtesting, but he wanted to know, have there been any other tabletop games or even digital games that influenced the design of the primary?
That's a good question.
I told you we don't play around here on this podcast. If it's
sorry to cut you off there, but I was just thinking, I think I'm in a little bit of a unique situation where I'm fairly new to tabletop games. I only started playing, seriously, if you will, in the past couple years. So I don't have the breadth of experience or knowledge about all the great games that are out there. So I know it's a common thing where a designer will just play as many different things as you can, try and learn as much as you can. You can kind of shamelessly steal or get inspiration from other games. So I think definitely I've been influenced by the games that I enjoy and I've played, and I think they really helped shape the experience that I was going for. Maybe not so much the mechanics or something like that, but I think the intent with this game, for the most part, was to keep it a little bit lighter. I didn't want it to have any of the negotiation or the political aspect of the theme. I wanted it to be like something that was accessible and you could teach to your friends or your family or people that aren't terribly familiar with the hobby board game industry. So I think that was more where I got my influence or inspiration rather than maybe the core gameplay and mechanics.
Okay. And I was also about to ask that as well. In terms of, I guess, the skill level involved for playing the primary, I guess it's going to be more on, I guess, the casual side as opposed to more on the hardcore side. Would you say, Matt?
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, the intent is just be able to teach the game quickly, be able to pull in friends that haven't really played some of these heavier games. Maybe people who are interested in politics, but maybe not so much board games might have an interest in it, and then it could be a gateway for them maybe to get into board gaming. So I think I wanted to keep it a little bit lighter while still having enough strategy and tactics from round to round where you feel like there's some cool decisions to make.
Okay. Now, going back to playtesting for a second, another question that I had for you is, while you were developing the game, of course, getting the impressions from playtesters, did anything, major change through the primary design? As in, let's say, after putting it in front of people, they said, we want so-and-so, and that kind of threw you for a loop, or, anything along those lines that kind of maybe threw, a minor or major monkey wrench into the design?
So this isn't something major to the gameplay, but it was a pretty big shift for me. So I mentioned earlier, at the very beginning, we based the map and the delegates and the regions based off of actual real life numbers from the primary election in 2016. So we were adding up thousands of delegates, and in a very naive fashion, didn't really think or really consider any other way of doing it. So we put it out in front of playtesters and other designers, and it was pretty immediate. Where, hey guys, you absolutely need to change this. You need to change this. And we didn't act at first right away. It took like one or two more playtests, and we realized, okay, yeah, adding thousands is not something that makes a board game fun.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess trying to think if there's anything else design-wise. Again, we're going to be talking more about kind of the work on the primary later on in the cast. From a design perspective or a playability perspective, is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to bring up now, Matt?
Yeah. So there's a couple of additions, like you mentioned, from the original concept that helped shape the game and make it a little bit more fun or interesting. So the addition of the news cards, which are sort of an event that happens every round, and you kind of have to adjust your strategy, or something happens to all the players and might impact how you would have otherwise played the round. That wasn't in the original design, and I think it really helps inject a lot of theme and flavor and also keep it interesting. So that's one aspect, like you mentioned. I don't remember if it was a recommendation from playtesting or just something that we eventually figured needed to be added to the game. But there's also candidate cards where each player at the beginning of the game is given two candidate cards, and they can keep one and discard the other. And that candidate gives them a sort of like a special ability, if you will, throughout the course of the game that can kind of help shape their strategy or give them a slight advantage somewhere. And it also determines how many influence cubes you start the game with. So those, I feel, add another layer of complexity, both to playing the game and also to designing the game. I found that that's probably one of the most difficult parts of balancing the game design so far, is really making sure all the candidates are pretty close in how useful they are, how easy they are to play, how strong their powers are. So that's definitely been a very big challenge.
All right. And I just pulled up your Kickstarter, the preview you have up on your site, so I can take a look at that while we discuss a little bit more about the Kickstarter itself, because this is another major part of game development. And then, of course, we'll move on and talk more about, again, kind of that first time challenge.
Sure.
So, as we said at the start, right now as we're recording this live, or streaming this live, the primary is not out on Kickstarter just yet, but you are planning for March 15th. Is that correct for the Kickstarter?
Yep.
All right. I'm looking at things right here. So by the time you're watching this recorded, this should either be just out or it will have just started. So one question I always like to ask developers when they're doing their Kickstarter is, how long have you spent, I guess, working on the actual Kickstarter itself? As you know, what the page is going to be, what your rewards will be, stuff like that.
I would say it's been several months. I'm not the best at keeping track of time always, but I feel like I tried to get out to a good early start and prepare myself. But of course, it's come to a mad dash at the end. I have a great graphic designer and artist out of Argentina, OK Art Studio, and they've been a huge resource for me. They're doing all the graphic design for the Kickstarter page. And they've been giving me help along the way. They've actually designed a game themselves, and they put it on Kickstarter. So if I put something out there that's kind of crazy, they'll reel me back in a little bit and say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" So they've been very helpful. But yeah, I think early on, since I kind of did know I wanted to do it on Kickstarter, I was out there doing research and kind of looking at campaigns and benchmarking and understanding, what works, what do I like, what seems like an interesting idea, how to run a Kickstarter, reading all the Jamie Stagmeyer posts on how to run Kickstarters and tabletop game Kickstarters. So there's a wealth of information out there, and sometimes it can be a little overwhelming.
For sure. And it's very tricky, especially with Kickstarter these days, compared to what was like, I would say, 3 to 4 years ago when things really were at its peak, or maybe even a little bit more than that, at least for the digital side. I guess with the research you've done from the tabletop, how is the Kickstarter scene still going for the tabletop market?
It seems very strong. I haven't gotten a ton into like the market and the data and the numbers of it, but it seems like a never-ending supply, hundreds of games every year, very successful games, games that fund with hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of first-time creators being very successful as well. There's all sorts of communities on Facebook and other social media for tabletop game creators, and just Kickstarter creators in general. And everything points to show that it's alive and well for sure.
Hmm. And definitely, as you said a few minutes ago, like the amount of money that's been raised, or sorry, it's been raised on tabletop Kickstarters has been it's been staggering. Like as someone who doesn't follow tabletop games all that much, like when I see them say, "Oh, it just earned like $2-3 million," I'm like, "Wait, what? What just happened there?" There was that big one from I think 2016 that like earned like I forget how much money. It was like I think a reprint of something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't remember all the figures, but I believe tabletop games, if not the biggest, is one of the biggest categories within Kickstarter and have had some of the largest individual projects on Kickstarter, which
Hmm.
just seems crazy to comprehend sometimes.
Yeah. Now, this is probably will infer into our next topic, but I think it also fits here. As a first-time designer, how did you feel about going on Kickstarter or preparing your Kickstarter plan?
It's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, it's scary. I'm very nervous. Luckily, I've been able to lean on a few guys here locally who've been through the process. Um, have had a few successful and some very successful campaigns, so they've been very helpful to me just to ask random questions here and there. Um, I think it's definitely a challenge, a bigger challenge going in as a first-time creator, as opposed to maybe a more well-known publisher or somebody who's still, somebody who's an independent or self-publisher, but at least has something out on the market or has done one Kickstarter already. So I think there's definitely a bigger hill to climb there for a first time.
Hmm. Now, with the Kickstarter itself, or actually the Kickstarter project or the page, did you
Hmm.
design the whole page yourself, or did you have assistance with putting that together?
Yeah, so from looking at other pages and things, defined how I wanted it to be laid out, the sort of content that I wanted to be there, working on, how do I want to convey the information, the actual physical creation, whether it's in Photoshop or some of the video rendering or rendering GIF animated images. Um, all that stuff, I had a lot of help from the graphic designer. But obviously there's a process there, similar to the artwork for the game, where you're directing. I want it to look like this, and then they'll come back with what they're thinking, and we kind of have to meld our ideas together. It's a similar process for the Kickstarter page.
All right. Now I'm looking at the page as we're talking, and you got everything pretty much set up. I guess in terms of here's an interesting question. Again, as a first-time developer, the
Mhm.
funding that you're asking for. Now, I
Mhm.
don't know. Do you want to mention it here, or has it been finalized in terms of what you're looking for the Kickstarter?
It hasn't been 100% finalized. It's gonna be. I'll give you a big range right now.
Okay.
Probably $10,000 to $15,000, which I think for a Kickstarter
Hmm.
tabletop game is pretty typical. Sometimes you'll see 30, 50. If somebody's really expecting a big success and they want to print a lot of copies. So in the last 2 weeks here, I'm trying to nail down some quotes and really finalize some numbers and figures from shipping and freight and printers. So that might vary a tiny bit.
Okay. Now, the question I wanted to ask you about, Matt, is how did you, I guess, determine, or how you are determining how much you want to set for the Kickstarter goal? Because this is another major point. Even seasoned developers can sometimes struggle with, you know, what am I asking for? Like, what do I reasonably want versus what I actually need to make this game?
Right. So I I don't have a huge business background, but I've tried to pick some up both through my day job and from learning online and from other Kickstarter creators. Excuse me. Um, so I tried to put together a basic P&L just to see like a few scenarios where if I can print 1,000 games at a manufacturer, what'll that cost me? And how do I envision selling the game? What kind of price point do I want to sell it at? How do I want to ship it to the backers? How much do I want backers to pay for shipping? How much do I want to subsidize or help pay for them? So it's a long process and it's very iterative and it's a lot of circular dependencies. I feel like with if you print more games, then it becomes cheaper, but then shipping gets more expensive, and there's so many variables.
Oh
Um,
yes.
so in the end, I'm sure I'm missing something, and I'm sure it's going to be a very complex process to see whether or not I did it right. But a part of it is as well. I want to be able to just get it out into the market. I'm not looking to make any money. I'd love to break even. I'm sure I've kind of resigned to the fact that I may lose some money here, but hopefully, I'll have some extra games here that I can try and sell
Hmm.
locally or at conventions and at least break even. That would be great.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's always very tricky. Again, like I've spoken to people who have done Kickstarters as well as those for card and tabletop based games, and there's
Mhm.
so much that goes into it. And I would say, I would say, like in my opinion, that the physical side of things with a tabletop may add even more complexity to a Kickstarter compared to a digital game. Now, of course,
Yeah.
if you're doing a physical game, yeah, or physical digital. Wow, that's a oxymoron there. A physical video game, we can certainly put that around, but tabletop
Mhm.
adds a lot more. And we were talking about this in chat a few minutes ago that there's definitely a lot more interesting factors when you're building an actual physical game that both lend itself towards Kickstarter and can also make it a lot more of a nightmare. And
Right.
before I get to the questions I have for you, Oscar wanted to ask: is there a minimum number of copies that need to be sold for a tabletop game in order to justify the project? Like,
Yeah, there definitely is, and it's a case by case basis. So, my game, there's a lot of plastic cubes, there's a lot of cards, there's a pretty big board. Um, but other Kickstarter games, they have tons of little plastic miniatures.
oh yes,
So depending on the contents of the game, your cost from a manufacturer can vary pretty widely. Um, so typically, a printer in China, where most of these games are printed, will ask for a minimum order of 1,000 games. Some will go a little bit lower, maybe around 500, but your prices are going to kind of
yes.
skyrocket, and it's not very linear. It's a little bit more exponential as you get lower and lower.
Hmm.
Um, so that's where a lot of the balancing becomes very difficult. Where if I want to print 500 games and I can kind of estimate the shipping, and I can kind of estimate, some of the other factors involved. Then yeah, I can calculate. Okay, I need maybe of those 500 copies, I need around 300 backers,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna assume I can sell a few of the extra copies, just on the side, and then I'll break even, and then I'll be happy, and anything else is just gravy.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, there's a lot of variables, and it
Yes.
depends a lot from game to game.
Hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things that when I spoke to previous developers about that kind of logistics of how many copies you print out, even just, and of course the other aspect, how you're shipping and doing that kind of thing. Shipping and
Hmm.
handling can be a nightmare, and that
Yes,
is
yes.
universal for any developer. So before I get to your question in chat, Oscar, from the logistics side of things, what have you done, or have you done any work in terms of, how am I getting this game to people and stuff like that?
Sure. Yeah, I would say that's one of the areas where I have the least working knowledge. Fortunately, there's a lot of good services out there that are kind of a one-stop shop where there's a lot involved from going from your manufacturer in China, getting it onto the port. From the port, Kickstarter backers can be anywhere in the world. So then,
Hmm.
with different taxes and tariffs, you might want to send a quantity of games to Europe directly. You might want to send them directly to Australia, and maybe the rest you want to send to the US and ship from there. There's so many variables involved. So I feel like I have a basic knowledge of how it works, but I think it'd be definitely a little overwhelming to try and handle actually all of those individual aspects on my own and coordinate with an ocean freight company and coordinate with UPS and coordinate with a local post service in Australia or New Zealand. So I'm planning on working with a third-party service that kind of handles the entire freight and fulfillment portion of that end of the spectrum, where you kind of guide them along the process, and you tell them, okay, I want to make sure that my backers in the EU don't pay a VAT, a value-added tax when they receive their game, and some decisions like that. But they take care of the minutia and the logistics, and in the end, you help pay for the shipping, obviously, and then their fee on top of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that is definitely the smart way to go, and it's one of the challenges for a lot of developers because there's so much that goes into kickstarting a game, and we're not even talking about just designing and finishing the game as well. And
Yeah.
it can certainly throw a lot of people for a loop. I guess for any developers watching this, were there any specific websites or people or books or anything that you did research on to kind of help you prepare for the Kickstarter?
Yeah, there's a ton out there. The first one that comes to mind is Jamie Stagmeyer of Stonemaier Games has an awesome blog of just Kickstarter lessons. He's had a ton of really successful games, both first on Kickstarter, now he's moved off of Kickstarter, but he's been super transparent in how he found success and how he learned from failures and everything along the way. So I think that's number one, a great resource that I've been trying to read and keep up on and make sure that I can learn from everything that he's gone through. There's a lot of board game podcasts that tackle a few different areas, both from like a design and development perspective, but also more of the Kickstarter and business side of things. I really like the Board Game Design Lab. There's Board Game Business. There's Breaking Into Board Games. There's a ton of really good content out there. Almost too much for someone with limited time, but you can learn so much out there, both in the design area and the Kickstarter side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's always great to have those resources available, because one of the things that I've learned, especially last year, is that sometimes a lot of the minutia of game development is sometimes hidden from a lot of people, and it can be hard, especially as a first-time developer, to kind of go, okay, I have this idea, now what do I do with it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Now, before I get to a few more Kickstarter-related questions, Oscar asked us a few minutes ago, did you consider other methods aside from Kickstarter for crowdfunding the primary?
I have. I think in board game, at least, there's probably two primary paths to get something onto the market, maybe a third. So there's Kickstarter, obviously a lot of work, but something that I've always been interested in. You know, I enjoy the business side of it, the logistical side of it, just looking at it from a little bit bigger of a picture than just designing a game. The other most common avenue is I'm going to design this game, I'm going to take it from an idea to something that I feel is really playable, and then I'm going to pitch it to some of the well-known publishers out there and see if they have any interest in it. And then if they're interested, you know, I can help follow them along the process and, you know, keep providing input or help them develop it. They're probably going to shape it a little bit to fit their market or their portfolio of games. So that's another common route. You know, obviously they have a lot on their plates. You know, they probably get tons and tons of applications, and I think that can be a little bit daunting as well. And there's other routes out there that people definitely take. You can, you know, kind of release it yourself as like a print and play where you provide a PDF and you just put it out there for free just for people to enjoy. And a lot of people have actually gone from that where, here's my game, play it, tell me how you like it, and just release it out there. But then they can kind of transition once they see the success or people really enjoying it and then bring it to one of the other avenues. There's also a company that's actually here in Madison called the Game Crafter, and they're utilized for a few different reasons, but they focus on prototypes. So a lot of game designers will print prototype components with the Game Crafter. They make boxes, they make boards, they have pre-made pieces like meeples and dice, and you can make custom cards. You can make, man, it's mind-boggling how much stuff they have available for prototypes. So that's a huge resource. That's awesome. But they also have a store where you can upload your design as if you were going to prototype it and just use it for yourself and your own design purposes. Or once you feel like it's a finished product, you can upload your files, your artwork. Here's my board, here's my cards, here's the other components that are required for this game, and they'll make it on demand for anybody who wants to purchase it. So that's another avenue to get a game out into the market. And I mean, of the four, I've always kind of fallen in love with the Kickstarter route. We'll see how it goes. I'm hopeful, but nervous.
Now, I'm glad you brought up the physicality of the tabletop game, because that was going to be one of my next series of questions were for you. But just to clarify for people watching, in terms of the design of the primary, is it finished from that kind of perspective? Like, is everything set up? Are you done in terms of building this game?
I would say it's 98% complete. I think one of the big pros of Kickstarter is that once somebody finds your project, hears of your project, and they like it or they're interested, it's sort of an avenue or an outlet for them to give some input into the game, to kind of put their touch on it. So I think from everything that I've heard and read, like people get very passionate about your project and they want to help out and they want to say, hey, I play tested, you had a link on your Kickstarter page for a print and play copy and I love it, but what if you just tweak this? Or what if here's an idea for a news card, here's an idea for a candidate card. And I really want to take advantage of that. Being able to be flexible with the design. I don't want to make major changes, but if there's some suggestions out there that can help just make it that tiny bit better, I'm all for it.
For sure. Now, when it comes to the physical design, this is one area that I don't have too much experience in because I focus more on digital games, but it's definitely one that has become a major factor for Kickstarters, either from a reward standpoint, the tabletop standpoint, and in some cases both at the same time. So, for you, man, in terms of actually building the physical set of the primary, what kind of work did you do on your end in terms of how did you want this to look and feel for someone?
Yeah, you're right. Like board games are very, there's a lot of spatial aspect to it. There's a touch and feel aspect to it. I think going into it, I kind of had a vision, maybe artistically, and I think as we kind of develop the game and kind of watch people play and see how they interact with the game, you kind of pick up on what people do when they're not actually playing. Maybe they're fiddling around with a component here, they're shuffling through cards, and just any of that, like that physical response or that stimulus that they get from the game. I wouldn't say there was anything too intentional where okay, let's really try to make somebody play around with all these cubes. Every player has 30 cubes, and they love just moving them around and taking them in and out of the bags. There were some gameplay concerns or like usability concerns where, how many cards can somebody, hold in their hand without feeling overwhelmed, or how many options can you present somebody before they just freeze up and paralyze. but definitely, while observing players and play testing and things like that, you can get a feel for, is there something that I need to fix or tweak with the physical presence of the game on the table.
Hmm. In terms of the actual art of the primary, did you do the art yourself, or did someone else create like the art for like the cards or the board, that
Sure.
kind of thing?
Yeah. So the artist and the graphic designer are both, it's a husband wife couple actually out of Argentina. So the wife, Rocio, she does all the artwork and the illustration, and then Sebastian does the graphic design, and he did the Kickstarter page and everything else. So I kind of provided some guidelines or some inspiration of how I thought I wanted the game to look and feel, and pulled some inspiration from infographics or political ads or campaign banners that happened in real life, and I felt like, okay, I wanted to take this to like a modern day feel. I didn't want it to be like a historical game, and provided some input and some art direction for the overall feel and look of the game. And then artists, they'll want to take some ownership over that as well, and they'll propose, okay, here's what I think would look really good, and here's how I want to sketch up this character. And it's a back and forth, and it's definitely a learning process for me of how do you interact with artists and give them enough freedom but still try and keep my vision for the game. So that was a very fun and interesting process for sure.
Hmm. Now, with the design, I guess, did your vision for the primary change over the course of developing like the Kickstarter, or as you saw more of the actual art come in?
um I would say from the beginning of the game design that I knew it wasn't going to be this crazy 4 hour long game where people, the gears are constantly spinning, and you're stuck thinking about what you want to do for your turn. So I think the vision was always to have it be a lighter experience, something that's easy for people to get into. So I think from that aspect, you want the theme and the art to match the experience, which matches the gameplay. So I didn't want any like negative connotations of politics or an election to come into play with the artwork. Um, I like to think of myself as somewhat artistic, but the things that they've brought to the table and how the game has ended up looking has just blown me away, and I'm very impressed with what they've done. So I would say it's shifted a little bit, but not drastically.
Okay. Now, one thing that I wanted to bring up as I'm looking at the Kickstarter page, one question I have for you are the stretch goals. In
Mhm.
terms of for people now, again, for people watching this live, they're not seeing the Kickstarter page, but the record folks should be up by then. But
Sure.
for the folks watching this live, how are you approaching these stretch goals that you have for the primary?
Yeah, this is one that I have kind of struggled with.
Hmm.
Um, I think my goal with the Kickstarter was always just to be able to, bring this game out into the world. If people enjoy it, I want to be able to provide it for them. And the other part of that is I wanted to put something out there that I was really proud of. I don't want to cut corners. I don't want to be too concerned about cost or I can't add that card because it's going to be too expensive. And stretch goals kind of plays into that. I understand that people enjoy them. It's kind of a fun thing to track throughout the campaign, and it adds some excitement and incentive for people to back the game and be engaged in the campaign and the project. So I see why they're there. I see why people like them. But I think my goal was always to make a really great game. So I had to kind of balance, um, you know, I want to keep people engaged. I want to keep people excited during the Kickstarter, but I also want to make sure that people, in the end, receive something that's really fun to play and is a really high quality. So, one thing I tried to do to kind of bring the theme of the election into the Kickstarter stretch goals is where there's a few different areas where people can unlock achievements. So whether it's a funding dollar amount or the number of backers or some stuff on social media where people are liking the account for the game or they're a fan on the Board Game Geek website, they can unlock these achievements. And for the stretch goals, once you get enough achievements, you can vote as a backer which stretch goal you want to unlock. Um, so for 3 points, I can unlock an extra candidate card, or I can instead unlock, a higher quality box with the special UV coating and the emboss on it. So kind of bringing the democratic process into the stretch goals was something I thought could be a neat spin on it.
Okay. Now, another aspect of the Kickstarter that I want to touch on are the actual options that people have for supporting. This is another thing that can be, mind-boggling for developers. How many things do I want to offer? What do I want to offer? And stuff along those lines. Now, again, I'm looking at the Kickstarter preview, so I don't know if this is completely finalized yet, at least on your end, but for people watching this, what are you going to offer in terms of levels of support for the primary?
Yeah, right now, I wanted to keep it simple, especially being my first game. I know a lot of the huge campaigns out there will have different things you can add on, or a T-shirt, or a coffee mug, or an expansion, and that especially becomes a headache for the shipping and logistics, and it gets very expensive as well. So I wanted to keep it very simple. So obviously you can back. And pledge to receive a copy of the game, and it's going to include all the stretch goals and the base game. If you're not quite sure, or you don't want to buy the game but you still want to support the project and support the campaign, you can back for $1 or more if you want, and just kind of stay updated, and maybe you're waiting to see how the Kickstarter or the stretch goals play out, and you'll change your mind later on, so you can pledge for $1 and we'll send you the updates. And we love the support even if you don't want to get the game. On top of that, there's a couple opportunities. You can get the game, but you can also be part of the game. So I wanted to involve people and get them excited, and somebody, I think it's personally a cool thing. I would want to do it myself for a game that I was really excited about. Is you can become one of the candidates in the game, and we'll use your likeness on a candidate card, and you can kind of be immortalized in that way.
Now, as a quick design clarification, are the various candidates, do they have any game affecting properties, or is it just more of an aesthetic, your avatar?
Sure, they do affect the gameplay in two ways. So your candidate determines how many influence cubes you start the game with, so that'll vary from candidate to candidate. You may have an advantage early on if you start with a lot of cubes, but on the other hand, maybe the special ability or the power that you have may be slightly weaker. So they each have their own unique ability or power that kind of allows you to play the game slightly differently than somebody else. So each time you play, you'll hopefully get a different candidate, or you'll find a candidate that you really like, and you'll get different experiences with different candidates.
Okay. Now, I am just about questions relating to the Kickstarter, but one thing that I was thinking about, while you're coming up again with what you want to offer people, I know another popular option that a lot of Kickstarters do is kind of like the early bird special. If the main thing is $35, let's say first 100 backers, they can get it for $25.
Right.
Did you think about doing anything along those lines, or what did you end up deciding regarding?
Sure. So I think that used to be more popular than it is today, and I decided not to do it. I think my intent was to treat everyone fairly and let everyone have the same opportunity. I understand why creators tend to do it. You want to have a really big day one and day two, and make your project look as successful as it can early on to kind of get that momentum from more of a business side. And while that would be great for the project, I didn't think it was worth it to try and alienate some backers who kind of missed out or heard about it later than somebody else. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had the same opportunity to get the same game at the same price for the Kickstarter.
Okay. Now, in terms of a quick time check, we have somehow, we're just about at an hour in terms of our
Okay.
cast. So we have certainly, like I said at the start, we certainly hit our minimum. Um, in terms of length, I figure probably another, I would say 15 to 30 minutes, depending upon any more questions we get from the audience, if that works for you, Matt.
Yeah, that's perfect. I've got my
Okay.
water here. I'm ready to go.
All right. Before we move on, then, away from Kickstarter, a few final quick questions, and for people watching this as well. If your game is funded, what time frame are you looking at to get the primary out to people?
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's a ton of variation, and from everything I've heard, Murphy's Law is very applicable to board game manufacturing and shipping. Um, so I've tried to put together a timeline, and I have some things on the preview page right now, but it needs to be tweaked a little bit. So the hope is to be transparent with the backers and let them understand, okay, here's how long we think this is going to take. Here's how long we think production and shipping and everything else is going to take. And we'll keep you updated as we go. That being said, things tend to go wrong if they can. So I think right now we're aiming to have games in people's hands around October. If everything goes well and it gets funded. I think there's a chance it could be better if everything goes 100% right. There's obviously a chance it can go slower when things crop up, but I think we're looking at October or so.
All right. So I think that is about all the questions I have for you relating to the Kickstarter side of things. Is there anything that we didn't mention regarding Kickstarter that you'd like to bring up now, Matt?
Huh.
I know we can go through a lot of topics on these guests.
No, I think we exhausted Kickstarter. There's nothing that's jumped into my mind.
Okay. In that case, then we'll move on to our final section, and that this will probably encompass everything that we've talked about before, and that is, what was it like being a first-time designer? Because this is a very interesting topic, and it's one that we're hearing from a lot more people thanks to how easy it's become for people to enter the industry. Although we could argue it's also become a lot harder to stay in the industry, but that would be a topic for another time. I don't think you're going to have too much on that just yet. But to start things off with, we've already talked a little bit about things from playtesting and design point of view, and we'll probably retouch on some of those points just to clarify it here. But
Sure.
I guess the first thing that I want to ask you about being a first-time designer, you mentioned this earlier regarding keeping to your core vision. While you were designing the game, was there ever like that allure or that feeling to try and go bigger, go beyond your original scope? Like how did you plan things out from what you wanted out of the primary?
Yeah. I would say it was probably more of an organic process. I think I started with this kind of fuzzy vision of it, and it kind of solidified as I went through, and I realized, oh yeah, when I did kind of envision this when I started, and it's become more and more concrete as we go through the process. I think naturally I was exploring different avenues. What if we added a wild card? What if we added a dual purpose card? What if we added all these different concepts just to see, hey, maybe this will make it more fun. It might add to the complexity of the game, but why not try it? I think over time, it's been a process of, it started pretty simple, and then it got a little more complex, and now it's back to this streamlined state. So there's a lot of adding and then removing and then trial and error. You're getting input from lots of different people, from playtesters, especially playtesters that have designed or enjoy more complex games. They'll give you feedback that kind of slants you towards them wanting to add more to it. So you just have to always keep that in the back of your mind. Well, that's a great idea, but I'm not sure it quite lines up with what I want the final game to be. So that can be tough sometimes.
And that's a major part even for digital games as well, as to how do you keep to your core gameplay loop? How do you keep to that original vision? Because on one hand, you have to be malleable and flexible enough for playtesters and people to suggest ideas, But at the same time, it's very easy to just go, I'm just going to put everything everybody suggests, and we end with this like giant mess of a game.
Right, right.
Now, I guess another point now, as you said at the beginning, with Mountaintop Games, it's basically just you at the moment, right? Other than the contractors for the art and the graphic design.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, this kind of started between me and my roommate Justin Hertz, and we worked on it, extensively together, and it was this co-design process. And um, since then, he's kind of let me take the lead. He moved away to another city, couldn't find quite the time to commit to keep contributing as much with the design, but has been a huge help in development and playtesting and bouncing ideas off. So it's been interesting for me to kind of shift from sort of this co-designer partnership when we first started, and now it's just me. So I've kind of seen both ways of operation, and they both have pros and cons. So it's been a more unique experience in that, I think, as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of like keeping yourself organized, that's something that any developer has certainly had trouble with. As
Mm-hmm.
basically a one-man show at this point, what did you do in order to try and keep yourself focused, or like, did you run into any problems with trying to, keep yourself motivated to working on the game?
Definitely. I feel like I go through phases where I'm really excited and then get burnt out,
Mm-hmm.
and then find the motivation and then don't really want to work on it for a while. Um, you know, I think one thing that kind of helped me is that I designed a solo mode for the game. So at times, it was something that I could kind of just force myself to do was, okay, this week I'm gonna, play test the solo mode once a night and take notes and make sure to implement any ideas before I go to bed, and just kind of like force myself to do that. So I think that was helpful from that perspective. Where if I had to wait for some friends to play test, I think I wouldn't have been as productive through some of those lulls in between where I didn't really want to work on the game.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify for this part, how long has the game been in development for?
I
I
would
think you said about a
say
year, I think earlier.
just about a year and a couple weeks.
Okay. Yeah, it can be very challenging when we start getting up there for these games, especially when you're just working on it by yourself. Like, it can be, as you just said, it can be very hard sometimes to keep pushing forward.
Right. And I think one point to add to that is it's been in the works for a year, but it's also been sort of the primary thing.
Hmm.
Not to use the phrase the primary again, but I know a lot of more seasoned designers will be working on a lot of projects in parallel, where they'll kind of take games in and out of focus where, okay, this game, I'm kind of getting burnt out or I'm getting stuck. I'm going to work on this other game.
Hmm.
Um, I I didn't do that as much. If I had a cool idea, I'd jot it down or maybe even print something out. But I think my focus here was, okay, I want to do this. I want to do it well. I want to get it out on the Kickstarter. I'm excited to launch this. I don't want to wait a few more years and kind of work on a lot of things at once and finally someday get it onto Kickstarter. So it's felt longer than a year because it's been the thing the whole time, more or less.
Hmm. Now, in terms of knowing of finishing the game, this is one of the major points about any game design. And one for those folks watching this live, I may put a post about it up on Game Wisdom today. Those watching this record probably about a week or so. But it's a challenge of knowing how much do you work on this game. Like, at what point do I say this is done? I have my checklist of A to Z. We hit Z on there. Let's get this game finished. And this is something that, again, not just first timers, but even veterans have struggled with, because there's always more you can add. I'm sure you can
Hmm.
attest to that as well. So,
Yeah.
with the primary, how did you sit down and decide this must include this, and this, and we're done. This is what I want out of this game. We're not going to add 5 more expansions to this game right
Right,
now.
right. Yeah. I don't think I ever put, very explicit constraints on or requirements on it. I think it was more of like a feel. So, play testing it over and over and with different people and new people and people who've tried it before, you can kind of see throughout the process. At first, they're like, "Oh man, it's good, but there's a lot to work on. It's good, but you really need to work here and fix this." And then over the course of time, people are making smaller recommendations, or they just kind of finish the game and say, "Wow, that's fun, good job," and they don't really have much more feedback. Um, so I think for me personally, it was more of um, an intuition or a feel that, okay, this is getting pretty close. It's never going to be perfect. I'm not sure I'm ever going to be 100% happy with how it ends up, but I think it's at a point where, my goal was to put something out there that people enjoy, and I think it's there. So I think once we kind of felt that, it's, I don't want to say it's good enough, but um, people are enjoying it, and there's not, these huge changes that people are suggesting that would make it that much better of a game. That's kind of just how I said, okay, I think it's ready. I'm getting kind of tired of working on it. That's going to play into it as well.
And I think that also goes back to what you were saying earlier in the podcast regarding that the game didn't really change all that much, as you said, from your original concept to where it's at now. One of the harder aspects of these games is just knowing, when is this game, when do I have something? What's that aha moment when you're like, okay, I can see people actually going out and buying this game and wanting to play it. I guess for
Right.
you, again, as a first time designer, Matt, like, what was that point where it suddenly began like, hey, I can take this beyond just me and my friends. I could try to turn this into a commercial product.
Right. Yeah, I think from early on, I obviously have a bias, but me and my friends really enjoyed playing it, and there was just this cool feeling and the tension and the cards, and we're like, okay, we love playing it, whether or not it's going to go anywhere, and even if we didn't make any changes to it, this is something fun. And I think throughout playtesting, as you get more and more feedback, like, yeah, this is pretty cool. Like, I would play this, I would buy this, and then you have some people who play it who love it, and they say, oh, okay, where's the primary? Let's play the primary. Sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's friends of friends, so it's always kind of hard to interpret, like, are they just being nice? Do they actually like it? Um, but you get more and more confidence over time that, okay, this is maybe something that people would be interested in. Um, I think the challenge for me is that people enjoy the game, they like it, they think it's fun once they're playing it. The theme, I think, is the scary part, where politics can be very divisive. People can be very into politics or be very turned off by politics. So I think that's going to be one of the challenges, is to see, um, you know, is that too big to overcome a really good game hidden behind a political theme potentially.
Hmm. Now, for any students or first time developers watching this right now, one question I certainly want to ask you is, from where you began the primary to where it's at now, just about finished, were there any aspects of developing the game that kind of threw you for an unexpected loop as a first time designer?
Hmm. Let's see. If we're focusing more on the design as opposed to the Kickstarter and the
Yeah.
business end, um, I think one thing that I was excited to try, and did some of, was the concept of blind or remote playtesting. So obviously, you can always kind of convince your friends or bribe your friends to play test the game, or kind of, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, with other designers, or go to these conventions where people go to play test games. But if you want to get a really good and productive experience and feedback, you can have somebody play the game when you're not there. Um, Send a game to somebody, or have them print out a copy and learn the game from the rule book. I'm not there to help explain or clarify anything. Um, so those are very valuable, but I think in practice, especially for a first-time designer, can be pretty difficult. Especially with a game where you have a lot of components, and it's not just a deck of cards, or um, you might ask somebody to print out a whole board and some cards and all that kind of stuff. So throughout the development, I'd reach out to people or post something online, like, hey, here's my game. If you think it's interesting, you can play test it, whether it's here or I can send you a copy, or you can print something out on your own. And it's a great idea, and you can get a ton of good feedback, but it's much harder to get people to commit and actually do it. You'll get a lot of interest. You'll get people to sign up, and they'll sign up for your email list or get in contact to help play test it remotely. But the number of those people that actually go through and send you some feedback can be discouraging at times, or it's much harder to actually get that done.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing I definitely wanted to touch on, especially again for first-time developers watching this or students, is kind of I don't know, I would say pre-production work, but kind of the extra stuff you've done in order to promote your game and to promote Mountaintop Games. Like, again, you're on Twitter, you actually have your own website up for the game as well, and like, I know for a lot of people who may be watching this, that stuff sounds like, common sense, but for a lot of first-time developers, I still see them struggle in terms of kind of getting things set up for people to come watch them or to come learn about it. I guess
Sure.
on your end, Matt, what was kind of like your checklist in terms of how I wanted to present myself online and the primary?
Sure. I think definitely that's a huge aspect, especially in the Kickstarter world. I don't want to diminish a game or like the concept of a game, but I think a lot of how you determine success in Kickstarter is marketing, and making sure that people are aware of your game. They won't back it, or they won't even try it out if they don't know it exists. So I definitely wanted to make sure to be present. However people try and find their information, whether you need a website, that's just kind of like a basic thing. Social media, just to be present on all the different outlets: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I think the board game community itself is awesome, and the board game kind of business community is awesome. Everyone's very willing to help each other out. They're so excited to see other people succeed. So I think the way that I've been trying to present myself and help others is a little bit different than you'd probably see in any other industry, where I'm just a person. I'm trying to make a game. It's very easy to connect with other people in the board game industry, where people just want to see what you're playing. They want to hear what kind of games you enjoy. They want to learn about your prototype. They want to get feedback on their design. It's just a very natural, welcoming community, and I think just because I opened up an LLC and I'm trying to print a game doesn't mean like I have to hide and pretend I'm this corporate entity and sell you my game.
And I think one thing that I find very interesting, you said a few seconds ago, Matt, that having a website is just common sense these days. I still see independent developers who don't have their own website. They're rarely on social media, and it's very good from your standpoint that you've already thought about this and it's already been prepared. Because again, there's so many little factors that can come back to bite you, not just in tabletop development, but just in game development as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it definitely can be daunting and overwhelming. All these little things that add up, where it seems like, okay, a website, what do I know about websites? I can remember some HTML, but that's it. And I just simple WordPress. There's a lot of templates out there. It's very easy to set up. They're really cheap these days, hosting and getting a domain name, and just even having something very basic where if someone's going to search for you on Google, you just want somewhere to show what you're all about, what you have out there. So there's a lot to kind of check off the list, but it's easier than it might seem, and you can just do one thing at a time until you feel like you have the right presence.
Definitely. And again, it's all these little simple things that can help you with your game. Now, one topic I really want to touch with you, again, being a first-time developer, and that is on, during the development process of the primary, was there any avenues that you try to pursue with the game that did not work out for you? Because one of the major topics when it comes to game development, especially with the news, is that many people report on the good, very few report on the bad. So for any first-time developers or students watching this right now, like did someone just not work out for you while you were trying to do it for the primary, and then how did you get around that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different concepts that are now dead or maybe percolating for an expansion down the line or something. But I think with playtesting, it becomes pretty obvious when you have a bad idea. Um, it's hard until you put it out onto the table and get somebody to play it. Like, oh yeah, this is really cool. I think this could make something like really interesting within the game. But then somebody tries it out and they're like, oh no, this is garbage. Take it out. Maybe try and adapt it later and meld it with some other concept. But there's definitely along the process a ton of ideas. I mentioned like it started pretty basic, and then over time, I'd add something, doesn't work. Add something else, doesn't work. Add a lot of things, maybe one or two works, but the rest are gone. So there's a lot of things that didn't quite work out. They seemed like a good idea at the time, but just not good.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's always tricky because, I mean, this is something that faces any game developer, that how do you, as the expression goes, how you kill your baby or how you kill your darlings when it comes to game design, because it all works in our heads. It's just another matter when you're actually putting it in front of people.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, we kind of got lucky on this where the core started out pretty well and hasn't changed drastically. So I think that's probably what I've been most attached to, and that was my darling that I don't want to kill. And I've tried to keep the mentality, as I've added new things, like, okay, it might work, it might not. I just want to try. I want to try to make it better. If it doesn't make it better, it's gone.
Mm-hmm. Now, here's another question. This could have also fit during our Kickstarter topic. Have you thought about expansions or continued support for the primary if it does well enough to warrant that?
Yeah, I mean, it's crossed my mind. Like I said, some things I tried to add in, but I either didn't work or wasn't a good idea, or maybe it just didn't fit with the vision for the game, where maybe it would just make it a little too complicated for the target audience for this game. But maybe after if it's successful, there could be a following or people who said, okay, I love this game, but I want a little bit more. So that's where I feel like some of those concepts, they're in a spreadsheet. They're just kind of brewing in the back of my mind. Where if it becomes a success and people want something more, there could be potential to have an expansion or something like that. It's definitely not on the forefront of my mind. I got 2 weeks and I'm overwhelmed with this Kickstarter stuff, but who knows what'll happen.
Yeah, something tells me by the end of the Kickstarter you may have a few more gray hairs by the end of the whole process there.
Yeah.
Now, I am just about out of questions, and as a quick time check, we are approaching an hour and a half in, so we're probably going to be wrapping things up in the next few minutes. But there is one, I think, big question I want to ask you regarding the game design, and then I'll throw things over to you, and then we'll probably begin to dial things back. So for you folks watching this live right now, if you missed the announcement before, final call for questions, for real, if you have anything left for Matt or I. So one thing that I want to touch on is balance. Because mechanic and game balance, I mean, that is a multifaceted topic. It's one we could spend who knows how many hours discussing. But, again, as a first-time designer, I guess this is a two-part question. The first part was, as you started to make this real, start putting things on paper, started thinking about how things are going to connect, did it ever get, overwhelming for you to start to think, hey, it's no longer just going to work in my head. How's this going to work, when I give it to someone?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think definitely with all the components to the game and the interrelations between different mechanics and components, it can get overwhelming. And I'm a big spreadsheet guy, working in Google Docs with other people or Excel to try and calculate things or just track, okay, here's the entire list of possibilities, um, and then trying to rank things and keep, how do I prioritize what are the best concepts that I have, and is this too swingy or is this too strong? How do I balance this little detail of this card? Tabs and tabs of Excel documents. It can get a little crazy.
Hmm. And the other part of my question is, from like just like more of the general design aspect of the primary or just game design in general, what was your approach to, I guess, balancing out your options? Again, you mentioned this earlier with the different kinds of cards, different kinds of things the player can do. Like, how did you start to put things together in terms of, is this too powerful? Is this too weak?
Hmm.
Like, how did you
Sure.
start to put that into perspective?
Yeah. I think so. Like with the core of the game and the action cards, I think by the nature of the game, that definitely helped balance it a little bit. Where you're not just making choices that affect you, and you don't only have to consider your portion of the game. You're constantly thinking about, what's my opponent going to do? How have they been playing? How much do I know about my friend? Like, do I know they're risky? Do I know they're conservative in their actions? Do I think they're going to come and attack me? So I think the over the course of a game and depending on how well you know the people you're playing with, that can contribute to kind of self balance and regulate some of that concern. Definitely, just from play testing and watching people play, you can kind of see, okay, that card that's a little bit too strong. I think people are using it way too much, and whoever uses it the most tends to win. Maybe we need to tone that down a little bit. Um, there's a lot of balancing there. With the news cards and the candidate cards, that's something where it kind of became a little bit more mathematic, where I can get an Excel sheet and I can say, okay, I have a list of 50 different concepts I have. How am I going to pick the best 10 to 20 that I want to include in the game? And I mean, from a combination of just watching it over and over and seeing people play and just getting a feel for, do I like that? Does it seem too strong? And then also kind of from a more um, number side of things, I can try and say, okay, what's like the expected value of this card if someone were to play it with a certain strategy, or how swingy is it? Does it feel like um, this news card? Doesn't matter who's playing this round well, maybe it'll just throw the game into total chaos. Um, and that kind of lends to like, what kind of feel am I looking for? What kind of experience do I want in the game? So there's all these different metrics that you can try and attach to a card or a concept, and just um, try and see, is this the best one that I want to include in the end? So it's a combination of all of that, and it's balancing is definitely difficult. I think the hardest part is the candidates. Giving each player a power. It's really easy to have someone feel like they got the short end of the stick with their candidate, and oh man, I lost the game because you had such a better power than mine. Um, there's a couple levers you can tweak. You can kind of try and make the power stronger or weaker, but if that's not granular enough, there's also the amount of influence cubes that candidate starts with. So you kind of have two different ways you can control the overall strength of a character or a candidate, but they're still definitely the most difficult thing to balance.
Hmm. And I think with that, I am just about out. One quick thing I wanted to ask, this may actually turn into a long answer for you, but one thing I wanted to clarify is that you're planning on making a single player version of the primary, or having a single player mode. For
Yeah,
people watching this, either live or recorded, how is that differ from a multiplayer?
sure. So the intent with the single player was as to try and mirror the experience that you get in the multiplayer game as well as possible. Um, so it's not like you have an app and it's just playing for you. There's no really in-depth AI to try and okay, what would a player do in this situation? But instead, you're trying to capture the main interaction that you have with other players. Whether that's like trying to predict what they're going to play or trying to plan your cards in like the best possible order so that you have flexibility to react to your opponent. So the way that ended up in the game is there's a deck of bot cards. You're playing against a robot candidate, and they kind of just take the basic actions and interactions that you would have with the other players, and it does it in a way that you can play against it as a solo player. So it'll move around the country, it'll drop cubes, it'll tell you exactly where to put it, how many cubes it'll play, and they also kind of have that push and pull with the super PAC and the fundraiser where, I don't feel like I can just use fundraiser cards and slowly accumulate cubes. I need to really go for the super PAC this round. But the bot might also try to do that, and he could prevent you from gaining those influence cubes. So there's a die roll involved. There's a little bit of luck there as well, just to kind of keep things fresh from game to game. And then there's also a way that you can tweak the difficulty. So as you get better, you can kind of make it a little bit harder and harder on yourself to beat the bot.
Okay. Now, one thing that we haven't touched on yet that is unique to tabletop games is designing the rule book of the primary. And again, as a first-time designer, how did you approach that kind of challenge with the game?
Yeah, that's it's been a difficult one for me. I'm not naturally a good writer. I think technical writing, though, is a little bit easier than some sort of fiction or prose. But it's been a learning process for sure. I just started in Google Docs, very basic bullet points. Early on, I just wanted to make sure to get the thoughts onto the page and make sure, as the design was evolving, that I at least had something to refer back to. And I wanted also to have something to send out to people for the blind or remote playtesting. One thing that I found very helpful, and I forgot who introduced me to the idea, but just was doing rulebook swaps. So there's a lot of obviously great game designers out in the board game community, very active on Twitter and social media, where everyone is so willing to help each other out. It's easy just to find someone else and say, hey, I'll read your rule book. Would you read mine? I'll give you some feedback, maybe some recommendations on what I would change or what's confusing. Because reading it through myself, oh yeah, this is no problem. I've played this 100 times. This makes perfect sense. How could anyone not do this right? But you get that first set of edits back, and there's so much red ink, there's so much highlighting on the PDF that you don't really quite realize. You don't know what you don't know, and it's been a big process to try and get it in front of as many people as possible, just to make sure that everything is clear. All the rules, the important rules, are really called out and things like that.
All right. Well, I think with that, we are just over an hour and a half in. Again, these podcasts, they seem to just fly by when we start talking about design. But I am about out of questions. I guess one last point. In terms of actually selling the primary, if the Kickstarter does go through, are you planning on doing it in physical stores, or will it be mostly handled through the third party or your own website?
So ideally, I mean, I'd love to get it out to as many people as possible. So I plan on contacting retailers, just sending emails, going in person. If they have any interest, I'd love to send them a few copies just to be able to get it out there. I don't really have a path to distribution or mass retail. So my expectations would be, okay, hopefully it funds, cross my fingers. The vast majority will go to backers, and maybe a store here or there will take a copy or two. And then I'll probably have some extra just to sell on the website, maybe any conventions that I go to, and just kind of keep the hustle on the side.
Good. All right. Well, I think with that, we're just talking about in chat. I think we've hit just about everything and anything that I can think of. I guess for you, Matt, Is there anything that we have not touched on yet regarding like first time design, the primary, anything at all that you would like to bring up now before we say goodbye?
Yeah, just I guess for anyone else in a similar situation, first time designer, early in the design career, the board game industry, and I think we've talked about this previously, but it's just very amazing. Everyone is so friendly and willing to help, not just willing to help, but they want to help.
Mm-hmm.
It's not competitive at all. People are so willing to, teach you about their experiences and help you learn from them. So I think there's so much information out there. Don't hesitate at all to reach out or ask for advice. I have limited information and knowledge to share, but definitely feel free to contact me. But definitely the industry as a whole is just incredible. So while it can seem daunting to design a game and put it on Kickstarter, there's just so much support out there that it makes it a lot easier.
All right. Well, I think that is a good point to end on for tonight. So, Matt, first off, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Hopefully, I didn't overwhelm you too much with questions.
No, not at all. Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. And definitely the best of luck with the Kickstarter. Again, we are recording this, so we're streaming this about 2 weeks beforehand, so it should be up and about by the time you're watching this recorded. So definitely want to wish you the best of luck, especially again, as this is a kind of your first chance of getting your feet wet in the game industry or in the tabletop industry as well.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Oscar said best of luck as well, so we're definitely rooting for you, and hopefully by the time this goes up or a little bit after that, you'll be able to report a success for your first Kickstarter.
Yeah, I hope so.
All right. Before we go, do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to say to, I guess, tie a ribbon on our little cast?
Yeah, just in line what I mentioned. Don't be scared. Don't get intimidated by any of the process. I think board games are so much fun to play and design and to try and bring out into the world. So definitely feel free to reach out. And there's so much information out there, and the people are amazing. So it's a great thing to do.
Mm-hmm. And one final point before we go, for people watching this, either live or recorded, who want to follow you or learn more about the primary, what are the best ways for people to reach you or find this stuff out?
Sure. Probably the easiest is the website, which is mountaintop.games. Not .com, not .org, anything like that. Mountaintop.games. And we're on most of the social media. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The names vary depending on the platform, but if you search Mountaintop Games, you should be able to find it there. And from there, you should be able to see anything that you're looking for.
Awesome. So, with that said, I think that is going to do it for our cast. So for you folks watching this live, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching this record and would like to get an ad-free version of our talk up a little bit early, check out patreon.com/gwbicer to get VIP access. But that's all I got to say. So once again, Matt, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Hopefully we can talk later on as things wrap up and kind of maybe get, if things go according with the Kickstarter, kind of get like a first time experience as to actually shipping the game and kind of the challenges there.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks again.
Not a problem. So, for you folks watching this, we are going to end things here. If you're watching us live, I will be back on later tonight for our regular game streaming. For you folks watching this recorded, that's going to do it for the video. If you are a developer out there, whether you're a first-timer or industry vet, who would like to come on and talk about design or just what games they're working on, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I am always looking for new developers to talk to, and we can certainly chat as we've seen tonight. So, that is all for me. So, again, Matt, best of luck with the Kickstarter. This cast should be up in archive form just around that time. And I think, like everyone else in chat, fingers crossed for you to have a success.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. So, with that said, have a great night, folks. Are you watching this live or recorded? And I'll see you all next time for our live stream or just more daily discussions here and on Game Wisdom. So, until next time, have a great night, everybody.